Good morning, students. Today I am going to explain you the second part of animal architecture. In the previous class, we have discussed about the symmetry, the coelom, and other aspects. Today, let me continue with the chapter animal architecture, particularly with reference to the metamerism. What is metamerism? Meta means many. Meric refers to units. So metamerism, it is defined as the phenomenon of linear repetition of body segments along the main axis of the body, in which each segment is a mere replica of the other. Metamerism is first seen in annelids in the kingdom Animalia. Each segment has appendages, muscles, nerves, blood vessels, excretory organs, and a pair of coelomic sacs. Metamerism is usually confined to the intermediate or trunk region, except the posterior and head region. That means metamerism is absent in head and posterior region or the tail region. Segmental structures are interdependent on each other. All segments are integrated into a single functional unit. Coming to the types of metamerism, the first type, true metamerism or eumetamerism, otherwise. Segmentation of the body develops by the segmentation of the mesoderm. Segmentation is externally by means of grooves and internally by means of septae. Here, the body contains a number of segments and the number of segments remain constant for a species. There is no change in the number among the members belonging to a particular species. New segments are not added to the body after maturation. Examples: annelids, arthropods, and chordates. Second type, pseudometamerism, which is also otherwise called strobilization. Here, the segmentation of the body develops by the segmentation of the ectoderm. So, in the true metamerism, it is the segmentation of the mesoderm, but here it is the segmentation of the ectoderm. The body consists of a number of segment-like proglottids, which varies in different members of the same species. New segments are added to the body throughout the life. The proglottids are functionally independent and there is no coordination or cooperation between the proglottids. New segments are added to the body at the anterior end, just below the scolex, that is the head region. They are segmented externally only, but there is no internal segmentation. Example, platyhelminthes like tapeworms. Let me go through some differences between metamerism, that is true metamerism, and pseudo-metamerism. In true metamerism, there will be true body segmentation, that is both externally and internally there will be segmentation. And in pseudo-metamerism, there is false segmentation. And in true metamerism, segmentation is visible both when the body is divided internally and externally. But in pseudo-metamerism, it is the segmentation only external. In true metamerism, segments are fused and cannot be separated on will. But in pseudo-metamerism, segments are loosely bound and can be separated on will. That means we can separate them without interfering with their normal functions. The most distinctive in annelids and also seen in arthropods and chordates. So one thing is clear here, that segments are called tegma. And so in case of pseudo-metamerism, proglottids of the tapeworm. So this is a picture which clearly explains you the true segmentation and pseudo-metamerism, that is false segmentation. So the first diagram, it is with reference to an earthworm where you can see both external and internal segmentation. But on the right hand side, it is a photograph of the tapeworm where there will be false segmentation and it is composing of proglottids in tapeworms. We cannot call these units as segments, but rather we can call them as proglottids. Coming to the advantages of metamerism, first one, hydrostatic compartments. So it allows variety of locomotor and supportive functions like swimming, crawling and burrowing. So these are the first advantages, and the second advantages are as follows. It lessens the impact of injury. So for example, if few segments are injured, others can perform normal functions, which increases the likelihood that the worm will survive. The third advantage of metamerism, the specialization of body regions in a metameric animal will permit the modification of certain regions of the body for specialized functions like feeding, locomotion and reproduction. So these are the three main advantages of metamerism. Coming to cephalization, you know that cephalic refers to head region, ization refers to formation. So cephalization, it is a process of formation of a true head by the concentration of nervous system, particularly in the anterior or the axial end, as well by the development of sensory and feeding structures. So cephalization includes the following things like concentration of nervous system, development of sensory and feeding structures. So here there is a photograph which shows you the animals with cephalization and the animals without cephalization. On the top of that you will see the hydra and sea star where there is no cephalization, that means there is no true head. And in the diagram shown below, it is the photograph or the diagram of flatworm, a leech and an insect, where you can clearly make out the head associated with feeding structures and sensory structures. So one thing is very clear, that the cephalization involves the concentration of sense organs and nerve cells at the front end of the body, and animals with bilateral symmetry generally exhibit this cephalization. And it is more complex in animals, that the more pronounced their cephalization. Continuation of cephalization, as I already mentioned you that the term cephalo means head. In animals with bilateral symmetry, there is a greater increase in the nervous tissue concentrated in the anterior end as animals increase in complexity. For example, brains have formed with accessory organs for seeing, hearing, tasting, etc. So here there is the photograph of the planaria where you can see the cephalization or the formation of a true head. Coming to principles of animal classification, under which let me first go through scope of animal classification. The first one is, it is the basic and purpose of most of the scientific study of organisms. It helps to identify the animals. It helps to know their taxonomic position. This knowledge is useful in the study of different kinds of living organisms and their beneficial and harmful features for the welfare of mankind. It helps to reveal the evolutionary significance of different groups of organisms. So you can clearly come to a conclusion that whether they are closely related or the animals are related very far. The information is applied in sciences like forestry, agriculture, medicine, horticulture, veterinary science and vermiculture, etc. History of classification. Aristotle, the father of biology, was the pioneer to classify the living organisms. Actually, he classified the living organisms into two major groups. One is Plantae and the other one is Animalia. Plantae included all types of plants and Animalia included all types of animals. Next will be Theophrastus, who is regarded as father of botany. Actually, he is the disciple of Aristotle. He modified Aristotle's classification. Then comes Charaka, our Indian scientist, biologist, and Parashara, who is also an Indian biologist. Both of these two scientists, they have modified Aristotle's classification by doing some modifications. A thorough and scientific approach was given by Swedish biologist, that is Carolus Linnaeus, rightly regarded as father of taxonomy. So Carolus Linnaeus has contributed a lot towards the understanding of taxonomy, so is rightly regarded as father of taxonomy. Coming to systems of classification, animals have been classified from different point of view. The one being the practical system. Here, the animals are classified based on their utility to man, whether they are beneficial or harmful. So, it is purely based on economical aspects. Second one, artificial system. It was proposed by Aristotle. Here, the animals are classified based on their similarities or superficial resemblances. Third one, natural system. It was proposed by John Ray and later supported by many scientists. This is based on resemblances and differences in their structure. Homology in the organs reveals that how the different kinds of animals are derived from their ancestors. Even Carolus Linnaeus has supported this system of classification. So today we are all following this natural system of classification with some modifications at regular time intervals. So this is the slide which gives you an overview of the outline classification of kingdom Animalia. So as we observe in this flow chart, kingdom Animalia is basically divided into two subkingdoms, that is subkingdom Protozoa and subkingdom Metazoa, and the classification is mainly based on the number of cells that they possess. For example, in Protozoa they are all unicellular, and in Metazoa they are all multicellular animals. This metazoa is further divided into two divisions, parazoa and eumetazoa. Parazoa includes cellular grade of body organization, whereas in eumetazoans they either have tissue grade or organ system grade of body organization. And coming to the further two subdivisions of eumetazoa, it is divided into Diploblastica and Triploblastica. This is mainly based on the body symmetry. Say for example, in Diploblastica they have diploblastic body condition, and Triploblastica they have triploblastic condition. So you should also observe one thing here, that Diploblastica is also called radiata because these animals have radial symmetry, whereas Triploblastica is also called as bilateria, where the animals have bilateral symmetry. Then this Triploblastica is further subdivided into three divisions: Acylometa, Pseudocylometa and Eucylometa. So as the name itself suggests, it is purely based on the type of coelom that they have. For example, in Acylometa they have acoelom condition, that is there is no body cavity, and in pseudocoelom they have false body cavity, and in eucoelom they have true body cavity. Coming to examples of animals phyla which belong to these divisions, subkingdom Protozoa has only one phylum as an example, that is Protozoa only, and subkingdom Metazoa, as I already explained to you, that it has Parazoa and Eumetazoa. Parazoa includes only poriferans, and Eumetazoa includes all other animals. And Eumetazoa is divided into Diploblastica and Triploblastica, whereas Diploblastica is represented by coelentrates and Triploblastica by the later animals. Then Acoelomata includes Platyhelminthes, Pseudocoelomata includes Aschelminthes or Nematohelminthes, and Eucoelomata includes the animals phyla starting from annelids to chordates. And again, this Triploblastica is further divided into two divisions by some authors like Proterostomia and Deuterostomia, which is based on the origin of coelom and the nature of the development of blastopore opening in the due course of embryological development. Coming to binomial nomenclature, first let me go through the history of binomial nomenclature. You know that in every part of this world, an animal is being called by a regional name or local name, and as these common names are not authentic and cannot be used for scientific purpose because these names change from language to language. Say for example, there is a very popular bird which is called house sparrow. In Kannada it is referred to as gubbi or gubbachi, and in German it is referred to as mush or paddle, and in Spain it is referred to as suago. So likewise, the regional names vary from one place to another place, and if we talk about the regional names, we cannot understand what the animal is being described. Then Carolus Linnaeus, or who is otherwise shortly known as Carl Linnaeus, proposed this system of naming of animals and plants, that is for every organism, which is called binomial nomenclature, and this was proposed in 1758. In this system, organisms are named and their name consists of two parts. The first part indicates the genus name and the second part indicates the species name from which the organism belongs. There are certain rules of this binomial nomenclature. Each binomial name of an organism consists of two Latin words. The first word indicates the genus while the second indicates the species. And the generic name will be start with capital letter, while the species name always it starts with a small letter. The binomial name should be italicized or underlined. Say for example Homo sapiens, as you see in the slide. Then the two taxa cannot have the same name. There are many other rules of this binomial nomenclature, but let me go through some essential requisites of binomial nomenclature. There are three most important requisites which should be in mind before giving any name to taxon. The first one being uniqueness. The scientific name should be unique and individual. It must be the only name within that nomenclature. Next one is universality. The scientific name should be universal and acceptable throughout the world and biological societies. Ordinary names cannot be used in nomenclature because it is very difficult for taxonomists to learn names of taxa in ordinary or what is otherwise known as local language. Now the last one, stability. Scientific names should be stable and authentic and cannot be changeable. Scientific name is the key to information about a particular organism. Therefore, even the principle of priority can be set aside by the International Commission. So these are the three major principles which comes under binomial nomenclature. So this is all about today's content, class content. So in the next class, let me continue with the other aspects of this chapter. Thank you.